You can spend hours studying, late nights, coffee after coffee, pages highlighted, notes rewritten, videos watched at double speed. And yet, a day later, most of it feels gone. Not blurry, not distant, gone. That feeling is frustrating, almost insulting, especially when you know you tried hard. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. This isn't a motivation problem. It's not a discipline problem, and it's definitely not an intelligence problem. It's a system problem. Your brain was never designed to store information just because you worked hard. It was designed to forget anything it believes is unnecessary. Forgetting is not a flaw. Forgetting is a feature. The brain constantly asks a simple question. Will I need this again? If the answer feels unclear, it deletes the data. Quietly, ruthlessly, without emotion. That's why effort alone doesn't create mastery. Systems do. Most people believe learning is about input, reading more, watching more, highlighting more. But the brain doesn't reward consumption. It rewards usage. Information that isn't used is treated like background noise. The same way your mind ignores ads you scroll past every day, it ignores passive study. Not because you're lazy, because your brain is efficient. That's why two people can spend the same number of hours studying and walk away with completely different results. One struggles to remember basics. The other seems to remember effortlessly. The difference isn't talent, it's method. High performers don't rely on motivation or intensity. They rely on systems that force the brain to care. There's a reason some students retain massive amounts of information for decades, while others forget most of what they learned within weeks. And no, it's not because they study longer. In fact, many of them study less. What they do differently is simple, but not easy. They work with the brain's natural rules instead of fighting them. Neuroscience explains this through something called the forgetting curve. The moment you learn something new, your memory of it begins to decay. Within 24 hours, most of it is already fading. Within a few days, only fragments remain. This happens to everyone, no exceptions. The difference is what happens next. Most people respond by cramming harder. High performers respond by changing timing. Instead of forcing information into the brain, they pull it out. That single shift changes everything. Memory strengthens not when you read, but when you retrieve. Every time you try to remember something without looking at your notes, your brain rewires itself. It marks that information as important, even if you struggle, especially if you struggle. Difficulty is not failure. Difficulty is the signal the brain needs to upgrade memory. This is where most people get it wrong. They assume that if studying feels hard, it means it's not working. In reality, the opposite is true. Easy study creates weak memory. Challenging recall creates durable knowledge. That's why rereading feels productive but produces almost nothing, and why testing yourself feels uncomfortable but works. The simplest way to apply this is almost embarrassingly basic. Close the book. Put the notes away. Take a blank page and write down everything you remember about the topic. Not everything perfectly, just everything you can recall. The gaps you feel, that tension, that frustration, that's your brain's strengthening connections. That's learning happening in real time. Most people never do this because it doesn't feel good. It exposes what you don't know. But mastery has never been comfortable. Quietly successful people understand this. They don't chase confidence. They build competence. Confidence is a side effect. Another principle high performers use is breaking learning into small, controlled steps. Not massive study marathons. Not last-minute sprints. Small, daily progress that compounds. When information is too large, the brain resists. When it's manageable, the brain engages. This is not about doing more. It's about doing less, consistently. Tiny progress doesn't look impressive. That's why most people ignore it. But the brain loves patterns. When it sees you returning to the same material daily, even briefly, it flags it as important. Over time, recall becomes automatic. Understanding deepens without force. This is how complex skills become second nature. You don't need hours a day. You need minutes, structured correctly. A few minutes of recall, a few minutes of review, a few minutes of focused practice. That's it. The power comes from repetition over time, not intensity in one session. This is how systems quietly outperform motivation. Timing matters more than volume. Reviewing something right before you're about to forget it locks it in. Waiting too long resets progress. Reviewing too soon wastes effort. High performers space their review
A
deliberately.
few days later, a week later, then a month. Each time, the memory lasts longer, like strengthening a muscle by training it at the edge of fatigue. This approach feels slower at first. That's why most people quit. But over time, it becomes unfair. While others cram and forget, you retain and build. Knowledge stacks instead of resetting. Learning stops feeling heavy. It starts feeling inevitable. There's also a mindset layer most people ignore. Mastery isn't just technique, it's identity. High performers don't see learning as something they do, they see it as who they are. They create environments that support focus automatically. Same place, same time, same setup. No decisions, no friction. Rituals train the brain faster than motivation ever will. When you sit in the same space, at the same time, with the same tools, your brain stops negotiating. It switches modes. Focus becomes a habit, not an effort. Distractions lose power. Attention sharpens. This is not about willpower. It's about design. Think about how you mastered something outside of studying. A game, a sport, a skill. You didn't watch endlessly. You played. You failed. You adjusted. You repeated. Learning worked because feedback was immediate and effort was applied where it mattered. Real learning has always worked this way. Studying should be no different. The problem is that modern education rewards appearance over effectiveness. Long hours look impressive. Full notebooks feel productive. But the brain doesn't care about appearances. It only responds to signals of importance. Use, repetition, and retrieval send those signals. Everything else is noise. This is why quiet mastery always beats loud effort. People who truly learn don't talk about how hard they studied. They don't romanticize burnout. They don't chase motivation. They build systems that make progress unavoidable. Over time, their advantage compounds quietly. By the time others notice, it's already too late to catch up. The same principle applies beyond studying: skill building, career growth, financial discipline, physical training. In every area, those who rely on systems outperform those who rely on intensity. The loud ones burn out, the quiet ones build momentum. Learning doesn't have to feel overwhelming. It doesn't have to consume your life. It doesn't require superhuman discipline. It requires respect for how the brain actually works. Once you align with that, progress becomes smoother, faster, more predictable. Most people will hear this and nod. A few will feel inspired. Almost everyone will go back to old habits. That's normal. Change feels unnecessary until the cost of staying the same becomes unbearable. But a small group will do something different. They'll apply one method, just one, today. Not perfectly, just consistently. Those people won't announce it. They won't post about it. They'll quietly improve, day by day, skill by skill. Until one day, others will ask how they became so good so fast. And the answer will be simple. They didn't rush. They didn't cram. They didn't chase shortcuts. They built systems. You don't need to study more. You need to study correctly. You don't need motivation. You need structure. You don't need to feel confident. You need to practice retrieval. Learning should feel challenging, focused, and surprisingly calm. When it does, you're finally doing it right. The choice is simple, even if it's not easy. Keep repeating methods that feel productive but fail silently. Or adopt systems that work quietly over time. One leads to frustration. The other leads to mastery. Not overnight, not loudly, but permanently. Start small. Close the book. Recall what you know. Return tomorrow, then the next day. Let time work for you instead of against you. That's how real learning happens. Quietly, consistently, inevitably.